In the high summer of 1884, a man lived alone out past the Wells Ranch, a mile up the road where the good grass gave way to scrub and stone. He could gentle any horse in Stone Creek County. He could not, for the life of him, believe he was fit to stand on a fine woman's porch. His name was Amos Tate. He kept a horse camp out there, a low cabin, a pole corral, a shed for the bad weather stock, and he worked for wages the way he always had. They brought him the half-wild horses and the ruined ones, the animals other men had given up on, the biters and the bolters, the ones that had been beaten until they trusted nothing. Amos took them into his corral and was quiet with them, days on end if days were what it took, until the horse decided on its own that his hands meant it no harm. It was not a trick. He could not have told you how he did it. He only knew that a frightened thing watches your hands, and that a man who keeps his hands slow and his voice low and asks for nothing will in time be let close. He believed that about horses. He did not believe it about himself. By his cabin door stood a tin basin on a stump, and beside it a block of lye soap, gone gray and cracked with use. Before Amos would set foot anywhere that mattered, a porch, a church step, the edge of a town street, any place a man might be looked at, he stopped at that basin and scrubbed his hands and arms raw. Not for the dirt. His were a working man's hands, and honest dirt had never shamed him. He scrubbed with the harsh soap until the skin went red and stung in the wind. It was the way a man does penance with the only thing he has. Then he dried his hands down his trousers and went on. He kept that basin between himself and everything fine, the way another man keeps a fence between his bull and the road. The county thought well enough of him. In the careless way a town thinks well of a tool that does its job. The Wells Ranch and half the valley sent Amos their worst horses and got back good ones, paid him fair, and forgot him by supper. He never came up to the houses. When a rancher tried to shake his hand over a gentle colt, Amos would only touch the brim of his hat and look at the horse instead. Praise never stuck to him. It just rolled right off. He had made himself small for so long that he no longer noticed he was doing it. It had come to feel like the simple truth of him. And here was the thing about Amos Tate that the whole county saw and never once thought about. He could stand in a pen with 1,000 pounds of frightened horse and gentle it down to nothing. Because he could see, under the wildness and the scars and the bad handling, the good animal still waiting in there for someone to believe in it. He could find that in any creature alive. He just could not find it in the man at the basin, washing his hands. And there was exactly one person in all of Stone Creek County who kept walking up that road to his camp anyway, up to the basin and the line he held, as if she had never heard that Amos Tate was a thing the town used, and set back down, as if she had business on the other side of his fence. Her name was Esther Wells, and there was not a man in the county under 50 who had not, at one time or another, worked up the nerve to call on her. She was the Wells Ranch's only daughter, dark-haired and straight-backed and easy to look at, and she had turned down every last one of them. The banker's son, 2 ranchers, a cattle buyer up from Denver with a gold watch and a smooth way of talking. The county had a word for a woman who did that. The word was proud. They put it on Esther Wells like a label on a gatepost, and after that, they stopped thinking much about it. They had it wrong the way a town generally does. What Esther Wells was tired. And not the kind of tired that mends with a night's sleep. From the time she was a girl, she had been watched, measured at church, talked over at socials, expected to sit just so and laugh in the right places and be, always and on cue, the pretty Wells girl the county liked to tell stories about. Every man who called was one more audience to play to. Every Sunday supper was one more performance. The cattle buyer with the gold watch had wanted, she had understood plainly. Not a wife, but a handsome thing to set at the head of his table where folks could see it. She had spent her whole life being looked at. What she wanted, though she could not have said it aloud to a living soul, was 1 hour in which nobody did. There was one place in all of Stone Creek County where nobody looked at Esther Wells. It lay at the end of a scrub road, past the good grass, at a pole corral where a quiet man worked. Out there, she was not pretty or proud or anybody's daughter, only a steady pair of hands that knew horses. The Wells Ranch sent its young, unbroken stock to Amos Tate like everyone else, and Esther brought them herself, because she could sit a horse better than most of her father's men, and because her father had long since given up telling her which work was a lady's. She would climb to the top rail with the sun on her back and watch Amos gentle a frightened colt, an afternoon at a stretch, saying nothing, asking nothing, and out there, with no one performing and no one watching her not perform, she could breathe. It was on that rail, somewhere across 2 summers of saying nothing, that Esther Wells had made up her mind. Without once meaning to, she had come to measure every suitor against Amos Tate, against a man who would stand in a pen all day and ask a frightened animal for nothing, a man who would simply wait. Not one of the bankers or the buyers had ever come close to him. She knew which man she wanted the way she knew a coming storm by the smell of the air, completely and with no say in the matter. There was only the one trouble. The man would not believe she meant him, could not be made to believe it. And the reason had a name and a date and a young woman's ruin behind it. And Esther Wells did not yet know the half of it. And just then, as if the county had decided Esther Wells had been particular long enough, a new man stepped down off the morning stage. His name was Ainsworth, and he was a doctor, and he came to Stone Creek the way good fortune is supposed to come to a town, on the morning stage, in a clean coat, with good letters vouching for him, and a black bag, and an easy, educated way about him that made the women glad and the men a little careful. He was, by every measure the county knew how to take, exactly right. He was whole, and he was schooled, and he meant to stay. He took rooms over the Mercantile, and inside a month he had set the Pruitt boy's arm and pulled the worst of old Hadley's tooth and stood up in church looking like a thing the town had ordered and finally received. He had not been in Stone Creek 3 weeks before he turned that easy attention on Esther Wells. Her father was glad of it. The county was glad of it. A doctor was a sensible match for a rancher's daughter. Better than sensible, it was a small triumph. And Wells let it be known, without ever quite saying the words, that he would not mind seeing the thing settled before he got much older. There was to be a great horse sale at the county seat at the end of the month. Buyers down from the railroad and half the territory's stock changing hands. And that summer had the feel of a season when things get decided for good. Esther felt the whole town leaning on her like a hand at the small of her back, steering her gentle toward the doctor and the head of his table. She rode out to the camp with it heavy on her, a green filly on a lead, and she found Amos at the corral, and she did a thing she had never let herself do before. She came near to saying it. She got as far as telling him she did not love the doctor, that the county could lean all it liked, and Amos Tate cut her off before she could finish, gentle as he did everything, and broke her heart with horse sense. "You're skittish," he said. He had taken the filly's lead from her hand and was running a slow palm down the animal's trembling neck, not looking at Esther at all. A green thing gets to the edge of a new pasture and spooks at the size of it, wants to bolt back to the one corner it knows. He crouched and lifted the filly's near hoof, checked it, set it down. "Doctor's a steady hitch, Miss Wells. Sound. Kind enough. A body doesn't always know what's good for it when it's spooked." And while he said it, while he told the woman he wanted to go and marry another man, his hands were moving over her saddle, quiet and sure, taking the off stirrup up a notch because he'd watched her reach for it all summer, snugging a cinch she'd left loose, making her safe for a road he was sending her down and away from him. It was the cruelest thing anyone had ever said to Esther Wells, and it was the kindest. And the worst of it was that she could see straight through it. She had watched him with frightened things too long not to see. Every word of it cost him something. He would die before he let her watch him pay. She did not take the doctor, but she did not get to say so either. Because 3 days later, Ainsworth himself came up the scrub road to the camp, and the easy, educated man brought a trouble with him that nobody saw coming. The trouble was a driving team. Ainsworth, meaning to make his rounds in style, had bought himself a pair of tall, bright bay carriage horses, handsome, half-broke, and full of a nervous, flashy fire that looked fine standing still and turned to something else in harness. He brought them up behind his buggy to have them made safe. On an afternoon he knew Esther Wells would be there, because a man who is courting likes an audience for his good sense. Amos looked the team over the way he looked at everything, slow, and he did not like what he saw. He told the doctor so, plain and respectful, hat in his hand. The near horse was a bolter. You could read it in the white at the edge of its eye, and the way it carried its weight back on its haunches, waiting. They wanted a month of quiet groundwork before anybody put them to a vehicle, he said. 2, to be safe. They were not fit to drive. And Ainsworth, who was a reasonable man in every matter he understood, and an arrogant one in every matter he did not, smiled the smile of an educated fellow being patient with the help, and told Amos to hitch them to the buggy and bring them around. He had paid good money. He had calls to make. He was not going to be told his business by a hired horsebreaker in front of a lady. It was the same words. Near enough the very words a rich man had used on him once before, years ago, 100 miles from here. Amos had stood with his hat in his hands that day and warned the man his carriage team was not ready to drive. He had been waved off. He worked for wages, and his warning was not worth much to a man who owned the horses, so he had hitched that team anyway, against everything he knew, because no one had yet shown him that a man is allowed to say no. The team bolted on the river road. There was a young woman in the carriage behind them. What happened to her on the rocks below could not be undone. Amos had spent every year since paying for that one hard lesson, that a man who does what he is told instead of what he knows will, in the end, get the people above him hurt. He did not hitch the bays. He stood in the dust of his own corral and told the doctor no, out loud in front of Esther Wells and 2 hired men, and God. And he did not raise his voice to do it. He said the team would not be driven that day, not off his place, not by him and not by anybody, and if the doctor wanted them ruined or wanted somebody killed, he could find another man for it. Ainsworth's face went red and then white. He said a thing or two about insolence and about a man knowing his place. Amos took it standing and held the line, until the doctor yanked his buggy around and drove off with the bays pulled in tight behind him, too angry to see that he had just been saved a great deal of grief. And then it was over, and the dust settled, and the thing that came next was the thing Esther would turn over in her mind for a long while after. Because Amos Tate, the man who had just stood up in the open like the man the county had never once let him be, looked down at his own hands as the quiet came back, and went to the basin by the cabin door and took up the gray block of lye and began to scrub them raw. He had reached above his place. He had told a rich man no, and the old fear was already closing back over him, that nothing good ever came of that he had forgotten himself again. Esther sat very still on the rail and understood at last that the basin had never once been about dirt. She came back 2 evenings later, alone, with no horse to deliver and no errand she could have named, which was itself a kind of declaration from a woman who had spent her life with a reason ready for everything. It was near dark, and the wind had come up cold off the high ground, and Amos did what he always did, which was to put the work between them. He built up his little fire, saw to her mare though she had not asked him to, And when she came toward the cabin, he moved without seeming to keep the basin and its stump on his side and her on the other, the way he had kept that line for years without a soul ever naming it. He took her cold hands a moment to the warmth of the fire, because the cold had got into them, and then let them go, because that was as far as the fence went. "You'll catch your death out here," he said. "You ought to be getting back. Your father," "My father," Esther said, "is not the trouble, and you know it." And then she did the thing. She stepped past the basin. She walked around the stump and the gray block of soap and the whole long, invisible fence he had laid his life out along, and she stood on his side of it, close enough that he could not pretend there was a horse or a chore or a doctor between them. And she reached out and took the lye soap up out of his raw red hands, took it clean away from him, the instrument of his penance, and set it down on the stump where he could not reach it again without reaching through her. For the length of one breath, Amos Tate let her stand there. The fire ticked. The wind went over them. He did not move, and he did not send her off, and his ruined, scrubbed hands hung empty at his sides. And for that one breath, he let himself be a man a woman had walked all the way up to. Then he stepped back. He did not argue it, and he did not explain it. He only reached and took the lye soap up off the stump, slow and even, the way he'd ease a thing out of the mouth of a horse that had got hold of what it shouldn't, and set it back where it lived, and put the stump between them again. For a moment it looked like he might say the whole of it. What he said was, "Some horses you don't gentle, Esther. Some you just keep off the road." Then he turned and saw to the fire, which did not need it. She went home. There was nothing else to do with a man who had sentenced himself long before she ever got there. But she had stood on his side of the fence, and they both knew it now. And a line once crossed does not go back to being a line. Amos lay awake in the cabin that night and made up his mind to end it clean. At the sale, at the county seat, in front of everyone, he would give Esther Wells up for good and let her get on with the doctor and the fine house and the life that did not have his name anywhere on it. He did not know that she had made up her mind too. The county sale came on a bright, hard day at the end of the month, the kind of high, clean light that hides nothing, and half the territory turned out for it, pens and pens of stock, buyers down from the railroad, ranch families in their town clothes, a whole loud crowd come to watch fortunes change hands over horseflesh. Amos was there because the Wells outfit had sent him to deliver a tall gelding he had spent the spring making into the best horse on the grounds. He stood at the rope in the press of people, the gelding calm as a church beside him, and waited to hand it over to the man who had bought it. And the man who had bought it came across the lot with his thumbs in his vest and his voice already up. A big, well-fed stockman with a careless way of giving orders to anyone smaller than himself. He was the very image of the rich man who had once told Amos Tate to hitch a team that was not ready, and it came up in Amos all at once. There in the bright daylight with the whole county around him, the river road, the white-eyed bolt, the sound from the rocks below. His chest drew tight and his breath went shallow, and his hands closed down on the lead rope, white at the knuckle, while the well-fed man bore down on him talking, and the crowd pressed in, and the years came up over his head like water. Esther saw it from across the lot. She did not know the whole of what was moving behind his face, but she had spent 2 summers learning to read the moment a thing tips over into panic, and she knew it when she saw it, and she did not stop to wonder whether it was her place. She came through the crowd, and she did not touch his face, and she did not touch his shoulder, and she did not say one soft word that anybody standing near could have turned into a story. She laid her hands over his hands on the lead rope, her 2 over his 2 on the worn leather, firm and steady. And she leaned in toward the gelding's head and said, low and even, in the flat, working voice of a horse person settling a spooked animal, Easy, easy now. He's all right. You've got him. Just hold the rope. To every soul watching it was nothing at all. Two horse handlers steadying a big gelding that had taken a notion in a crowd. Only Amos knew the gelding was calm as still water. Only Amos knew that the thing she was gentling, with her hands flat and warm over his and her voice pitched low for a frightened creature, was him. And he felt it under everything else. Her hands, soft the way nothing in his whole life had been soft, laid down over hands that were red and rough and cracked from a lifetime of lie. And the panic, finding nowhere left to go against that steady pressure, began to let go of him. When he could breathe again, he did the only thing he had left to keep her at a safe distance. The thing he had been getting himself ready to do for weeks. He looked at her, at Esther Wells in her town clothes with her hands over his in front of the entire county, and he gave her up the only way he knew how. "You ought not be seen with the likes of me," he said, and he made his mouth go up at the corner like it was a joke. "You're too beautiful for me, Esther. Always were. Go on now." And Esther Wells leaned in the last inch so that the words went to him and to no one else in all that crowd, and she said it. "But I've saved my heart for you." The rope went slack in his hands. Everything he had built his small life to keep out came in over the fence at once, quiet, in broad daylight, with her hands still warm on his. And Amos Tate, who had spent his years certain he was a thing the world used and set down, stood in the middle of the county and could not for once find the lie to make it untrue. He did not ask her that day. He was not a man who could be hurried, even into his own happiness, and a thing held shut for years does not swing wide all at once. But he came up the road to the Wells place a week later, came all the way up past the gate and the yard and the dogs, up onto the porch he had told himself for years he had no business standing on. And this time he did not stop on the step to weigh whether he was fit for it. He had his hat in his hands and nothing in the way of a speech, because he had never owned one. Esther came out, her father in the doorway behind her, not yet knowing what to make of it. And Amos said what he had come to say in plain words, no more than the thing needed. He told it to her the way he'd lay out a horse's faults to a buyer who deserved the truth. He had no house worth the name. He had no money to speak of, and a trade that left a man's hands cracked and rough. He had spent a long time certain he had nothing to set before a woman like her, and he would not insult her by pretending otherwise. He turned the hat once, slow in his ruined hands. "But I'm done telling you what's good for you," he said. "You always did know that better than I did." And then plain, looking at her and not at the hat, "I'd count it an honor if you'd have me." Esther Wells did not make him wait, and she did not make a speech of her own. She said yes the way you'd say it to the one sensible thing in a foolish world. And then, because she had spent her whole life being looked at and was good and done with it, she took his ruined hand right there on the porch in front of her father and the dogs in the wide, bright valley, and she did not let go of it. They were wed that fall when the aspens went to gold up the high draws, and the man who had kept a fence down the middle of his life let her walk to the wrong side of it for good. They had a long marriage, Amos and Esther Tate, and a quiet one. He went on gentling the county's ruined horses to the end of his days and got himself a real name for it at last, the way a man will when somebody finally stands beside him and will not let him slip out the back of the room. They were never rich. They raised their children out at the horse camp, which grew over the years into a true home, a proper house where the cabin had stood, good fences, a windbreak of cottonwoods Esther planted her first spring that lived to shade her grandchildren. And the basin stayed by the door, but the lie block wore down and was not replaced with one so harsh, and somewhere in the early years, without either of them marking the day it happened, the basin quit being a fence. It became only what it looked like, a place to wash up. Of an evening, you'd find the two of them there together when the work was done, side by side at the stump in the last of the light, washing the day off their hands, his rough and hers no longer so soft, and neither of them sparing a thought for the line that used to run between them, because there was no line anymore. He had led her across it so long ago, he'd forgotten he ever held it. The man had spent half his life able to find the good in any broken thing alive, and unable to find it in himself. It took a woman who was tired of being looked at, and a pair of hands laid over his in a crowd, to show him what every frightened horse he ever gentled had already known, that the hands were kind and a body could come to them and be safe. He never did believe he was owed it. He only at the last let himself have it. That's the story of Amos Tate, who could gentle anything in this world but himself, and the woman who walked up the road past every fence he built until she was standing on the inside of all of them. If you have ever loved somebody who could not see their own worth, or been that somebody yourself, I'd be glad to hear about it in the comments. And if you've a mind to know what became of the doctor after that day at the sale, or whether the county ever did learn to look twice at the man at the horse camp, stay on with me. There's more road yet, and I'll tell it to you on down the way.